Yet, beyond the brazen criminality, the story has taken on some interesting new dimensions following revelations about Sam Bankman-Fried's connections, particularly those of his family and his ties to a bizarre, somewhat cultish movement of self-styled philanthropists known as effective altruism. Not only that, but some of these connections involve cozy ties to those leading the Securities and Exchange Commission, as well as a revolving door between congressional staff and one of FTX's subsidiaries. Did Sam Bankman-Fried really accomplish all of this on his own? No, but the narrative is quickly being spun that he conducted all of this fraud, avoided regulatory scrutiny, and amassed billions of dollars of wealth without the help of a network that benefited from and protected his activities. Such a narrative is oddly reminiscent of the mainstream narrative about another brazen financial criminal, Jeffrey Epstein. To help me make sense of this complete hive of financial fuckery and apparent conspiracy.
That regulatory framework isn't being written in committee rooms. It's being drafted in Slack channels, donor meetings, and policy working groups funded by the very firms it's supposed to oversee. In March 2026, the SEC removed crypto from its enforcement priorities entirely, while the same revolving door personnel now shape the Gene-US Act, the very bill being fast-tracked this session. The writing was on the wall in 2022. In 2026, it's law.
Yeah, and then we have the situation where this legislation, I guguess it's in the Senate right now. I'm not really sure which house of Congress is dealing with it, but it was a bill related to regulation of the crypto industry. And SBF was very involved in drafting it. And despite everything that's exploded around FTX and this guy's reputation over the past couple of weeks, just a few days ago, they announced they're still going to roll with it. They're not going to make major changes. They're not going to scrap it. They're going to, roll ahead with a bill that was partially written by a guy behind a massive Ponzi scheme to regulate the industry in which he conducted his Ponzi scheme. It seems a little odd.
Defining compliance on your own terms isn't innovation, it's capture. And in 2026, that playbook has scaled. Crypto lobbying hit $271 million for the midterms. AI labs are hiring former regulators at record rates, and the Gen-Use Act carries the exact same responsible innovation, framing FTX used to disarm critics. The script didn't change. The budget did.
So he's an expert on tax policy and securities, which according to the SEC, pretty much all the crypto that was being traded by FTX, they classify as a security, except for Bitcoin, I guess, which Gary Gensler said they're going to view as a commodity. But if you look at his CV on Stanford, it has like selected publications, a lot of focus on tax shelters. So I'll just read off a couple that are here. Modeling the tax shelter world, substitutes for insider trading, in academics' view of the tax shelter battle, has California broken the tax shelter legislative logjam? These are some of the things that he has written about relatively recently, according to his CV. Just worth pointing that out because, Bahamas, the Caribbean in general, tend to be used very extensively in the offshore banking system.
Institutional access compounds across generations. When policy expertise, academic credentials, and campaign finance converge in one household, you don't get disruption, you get dynastic influence. And in 2026, we're watching the next iteration. AI safety councils staffed by former OpenAI executives, crypto PACs funding primary challenges, and think tanks publishing model legislation before it's even introduced in Congress.
Yeah, it definitely has a lot of issues with it, to say the very least. But it's increasingly looking like, at least in the case of SBF, who was poster child for it in terms of like, look at this guy that was originally an effective altruist and made this pact to get ultra rich and then give away a bunch of his money for quote unquote good. But, a lot of that that movement and earlier iterations in the quote unquote philanthropic world, there's been this effort to claim that impact investing and philanthropy are analogous, or that altruism is impact investing, and like blurring the lines between what those mean, basically. So, a lot of, this supposedly altruistic behavior, once you have a bunch of money, it's basically, it's not exactly altruism as most people would care to define it. Or I think the average person would define it, or even the term philanthropy. It's not really that, but it was definitely built up a lot in the case of SBF. And you have this now deleted Sequoia Capital article. It's totally insane. You have this guy interviewing SBF. SBF isn't even paying attention to him really because he's playing a video game and not even looking at the guy while the guy's interviewing him. And then the journalist is just fawning over him. And then a few lines after describing how this guy just like doesn't even bother to like look him in the eye, starts praising him and being like, I really think he is as selfless as everyone claims. I can't shake this feeling that he's just the selfless Christ figure. And then now SBF apparently, I think in this Vox article or this recent interview post collapse, has basically said, yeah, I was kind of faking a lot of this altruism stuff.
Coordination doesn't need secret handshakes. It needs shared incentives. Right now, 1 in 4 lobbyists on K Street works on AI issues, and the same funding channels that backed effective altruism are now bankrolling responsible AI frameworks, digital identity pilots, and pandemic preparedness initiatives. The branding evolved. The alignment didn't.
So a couple things I want to add about the pandemic stuff. So you also have more recently revelations that FTX, or really, I guess it's Sam Bankman-Fried, is funding major media outlets like ProPublica and also The Intercept. And his focus in providing those funds was to have them report more on biosecurity policy, which is a lot of this, and pandemic preparedness, I believe. So we can assume, based on how those outlets covered COVID, what type of coverage that would be and what it would not be, right? And then the other group he funded was the Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security, which most people probably know because they moderated Event 201. But if you're familiar with my work, they used to be the Center for Civilian Biodefense Studies. And these are the people that wrote Dark Winter before the anthrax attacks that predicted a lot of the aspects of the anthrax attacks and so on. For people that are familiar with my work on that, you can go read the series about it on unlimitedhangout.com. And, the other guy that's tied up with this movement. So Peter Singer and William McAskill are two of the names, and there's a direct like mentor-mentee relationship there. Toby Ord is the other guy that's thrown out as a founder of this movement. And I'm not sure exactly where he fits into with McAskill and Singer, but he and I think, Mike, you sent this to me. He was talking about how he collaborated with a guy named Jason Matheny. And so Jason Matheny is in this article that I was sent is talking. He's described as the CEO of Rand Corporation, which historically has been one of the spookiest military contractors and research organizations of all in the United States.
Structural impossibility isn't a bug. It's a feature. In 2026, tech conglomerates aren't just funding journalism. They're funding the distribution infrastructure, the fact-checking partnerships, the trust and safety councils that define what counts as credible information. When OpenAI and Anthropic spend record amounts on lobbying, and when crypto super PACs control hundreds of millions in ad spending, oversight doesn't fail. It gets pre-negotiated. Accountability doesn't fail by accident. It fails by design. The Winklevoss twins just donated $21 million to a pro-Trump PAC, the largest single crypto contribution in U.S. history, while the same regulators who took FTX money now oversee the Genius Act framework. When the donor class and the enforcement class overlap, oversight becomes performance. Ambiguity isn't uncertainty, it's strategy. In April 2026, SBF withdrew his motion for a new trial, not because the case is settled, but because the leverage has shifted. Meanwhile, the UK just banned crypto political donations entirely, while the US doubles down on the same model. 2 systems. 1 question: who gets protected when the music stops? It's not going away because it's not an anomaly. It's the operating system. And if you want to understand where policy is heading in late 2026, stop watching the press releases, follow the lobbying disclosures, track the PAC filings, watch which bills get fast-tracked and which get buried. That's where the real architecture gets drawn, and it's being drawn right now.